The history of the bed does not begin with a frame or a mattress, but with a hollow in the dirt. 200,000 years ago, our ancestors were already engineers of comfort, though their materials were humble. In caves across southern Africa, archaeologists have discovered the remains of the world's first beds, layered piles of sedges and grasses. These were not mere heaps of trash. They were carefully constructed pieces of technology. The bottom layers consisted of broadleaf plants that provided a cushioned barrier against the cold stone floor, while the top layers were often composed of aromatic plants like the Cape laurel. This wasn't just for the scent. The Cape laurel contains natural insecticidal chemicals that served as a primitive but effective way to ward off mosquitoes and flies while the family slept. To lie down in the Paleolithic era was to participate in a ritual of survival. Every few weeks, these grass beds were intentionally burned to ash. This was a clever cleaning mechanism to clear out pests and old debris before a fresh, clean layer of greenery was laid down. It was a cycle of renewal that lasted for millennia, a primitive precursor to the modern ritual of changing the sheets. When we lie down today, we are distant echoes of those early humans who sought safety in the scent of crushed leaves and the warmth of a fire's dying embers. We often forget that the foundation of human rest was built on the floor, using the chemistry of the earth to find a few hours of peace in a dangerous world. As civilizations began to rise from the river valleys of the Near East, the bed rose with them. In ancient Egypt, the bed became a symbol of status and a literal shield against the hazards of the earth. While the common person still slept on a mat of woven reeds on a mud brick floor, the elite began to elevate themselves physically and socially. The Egyptian bed was a rectangular wooden frame, often sloped downward toward the feet, with a woven mesh of leather or linen cord to support the body. But the most striking feature to a modern observer was the lack of a soft pillow. Instead, the Egyptians used a curved headrest made of wood, ivory, or even stone. To modern sensibilities, a stone block seems the antithesis of comfort, but in the sweltering heat of the Nile, it was a brilliant design. It allowed for airflow around the head and preserved the elaborate wax-heavy hairstyles that took hours to create and were meant to last for days. These beds were often carved with the legs of lions or bulls, symbolically imbuing the sleeper with the strength of the beast while they remained in the vulnerable state of slumber. To sleep in Egypt was to be suspended between the domestic world and the divine, protected by the carved images of Bes, the dwarf god who guarded against nightmares and serpents. The bed was no longer just a place to lay one's head, it was a consecrated space for the soul's nightly journey. By the time the Roman Empire reached its zenith, the bed, or the Lectus, had moved far beyond a simple place of rest. It had become the primary piece of furniture for the Roman citizen's entire life. There were different beds for different functions: the Lectus cubicularis for sleeping, the Lectus genialis for marriage, and most famously the Lectus tricliniaris for dining. The Romans did not sit at tables to eat. They reclined on padded couches, leaning on their left elbows while they feasted, debated, and conducted the business of the state. This changed the very architecture of their homes, making the dining room or triclinium the center of the house. These beds were works of immense craftsmanship, inlaid with tortoiseshell, ivory, and silver, featuring high headboards known as fulcra. To a Roman, the idea of standing up to eat or work was a sign of the lower classes or a lack of sophistication. The bed was a theater of social standing. Even in death, the Roman was laid upon a lectus funebre, carrying the comfort of the couch into the afterlife. This era represents the peak of the bed as a multifunctional hub, a concept that would largely disappear for 1,000 years before returning in the modern digital age, where we once again work and eat from our mattresses. In the Middle Ages, the bed took a turn toward the communal and the crowded. As the grand villas of Rome crumbled, they were replaced by the great halls of Northern Europe. In these drafty, smoke-filled spaces, privacy was a luxury that simply did not exist for anyone but the highest nobility. The great bed of the medieval household was a massive wooden platform, often filled with straw or, for the wealthy, expensive down feathers gathered from geese. But you did not sleep in it alone. A single bed might hold a husband, a wife, their children, and even a traveling guest or a high-ranking servant. Sleep was a social activity and a shared defense against the terrors of the night and the literal chill of the winter. To keep out the biting drafts of a stone castle, the bed evolved into a room within a room. Heavy velvet or wool curtains were hung from the ceiling or a wooden frame, creating a cocoon of warm, stale air. Inside these curtains, the medieval sleeper was shielded from the night miasmas that were thought to carry disease through the damp air. It was a world of darkness and heavy fabric, where the boundaries between the individual and the family were blurred by the shared warmth of a common mattress and the heavy weight of the quilts. As the Renaissance blossomed, the bed underwent a transformation from a communal platform to a towering monument of wood and fabric. This was the era of the Great Bed of Ware, a legendary piece of furniture so large it could reportedly hold 12 people. But for the average aristocrat, the goal was not size, but insulation and display. The four-poster bed became the standard, featuring thick oak pillars and a heavy wooden canopy known as a tester. These structures were essentially small, portable rooms. The reason for this was practical. Houses were incredibly cold, and the belief in bad air was at its peak. By drawing the heavy velvet curtains, a sleeper could create a microclimate of body heat that stayed trapped within the bed's enclosure throughout the night. These beds were so valuable that they were frequently listed as the most expensive item in a person's will. Even William Shakespeare famously left his second-best bed to his wife, which was actually a gesture of intimacy, as the best bed was reserved for guests. The mattresses themselves were a complex engineering feat. A base of interlaced ropes provided the spring, which had to be tightened periodically with a wooden key. This is where we get the phrase "sleep tight." On top of these ropes sat a sack of straw, followed by a thick mattress of horsehair or feathers. It was a soft, sinking world that required a small ladder just to enter, separating the sleeper from the cold, hard reality of the floor. Perhaps the strangest chapter in the history of sleep is the lost custom of segmented sleep. Before the invention of the light bulb, humans didn't typically sleep in one 8-hour block. Instead, they practiced biphasic sleep. People would go to bed shortly after dusk, sleep for about 4 hours, and then wake up around midnight. This period of wakefulness was known as the watch. For 2 hours, the house would come alive with low-key activity. People would pray, read by candlelight, or visit neighbors. It was considered the most meditative and creative time of the day, a quiet bridge between two worlds of darkness. After this midnight interval, people would return to their beds for their second sleep, which lasted until dawn. This wasn't a choice, it was a biological norm reflected in literature and court records for centuries. It was only with the Industrial Revolution and the advent of gaslighting that this rhythm was broken. As the workday was standardized and streets became lit at night, the watch was squeezed out. We forced our bodies to consolidate sleep into a single efficient block to match the ticking of the factory clock. In doing so, we lost a unique window of human consciousness that had existed for as long as we had beds to return to. In the royal courts of France, particularly under Louis XIV, the bed was transformed into a literal throne of state. The Sun King famously took the concept of the bedchamber and turned it into a public theater. His daily routine involved the lever and the coucher, the ritualized rising and going to bed performed in front of dozens of courtiers. To be invited into the king's bedroom was the highest honor in the land. The bed was not a place of privacy, it was the seat of power. Important treaties were signed and royal edicts were delivered, all while the king reclined against a mountain of silk pillows. This lit de justice, or bed of justice, meant that the king never truly had to leave his sanctuary to rule his kingdom. The furniture itself was draped in gold-embroidered crimson velvet, so ornate that the bed often cost more than a small palace. This era represents the ultimate paradox of the bed, a piece of furniture designed for the most private of human acts, sleep being used as the most public stage for political theater. It reinforced the idea that the monarch was a different kind of human, one whose very rest was a matter of national importance and public spectacle. The 19th century brought a cold, clinical revolution to the bedroom. As the medical world began to understand the link between germs and disease, the old, dust-collecting wooden beds and heavy velvet curtains were suddenly seen as death traps. The Victorian era saw the rise of the iron and brass bedstead. Metal was non-porous, easy to scrub with lye, and most importantly, it didn't provide a hiding place for bedbugs. The hygienic bed was born. Mattresses also evolved, moving away from lumpy straw and feathers toward staple-free cotton and the first rudimentary inner springs. This was the beginning of the industrialized sleep we recognize today. Beds became mass-produced, uniform, and stripped of their theatrical trappings. The focus shifted entirely to the science of the prevention of moisture. The bedroom was no longer a social hub or a throne room. It was redefined as a private, sterile sanctuary for health and recovery. By the end of the century, the communal bed had vanished, replaced by the twin bed movement, as even married couples were encouraged to sleep in separate frames to ensure purity of air and undisturbed rest. It was the birth of the modern solitary sleep experience. In the mid-20th century, the bed became a frontier for chemical and material engineering. The discovery of polyurethane foam and the refinement of memory foam, originally developed by NASA to cushion astronauts during liftoff, changed the feeling of sleep forever. No longer did a sleeper rest on a bed, they rested within it. The 1970s even saw the brief, chaotic rise of the waterbed, a cultural phenomenon that turned the bedroom into a liquid landscape. While often mocked today, the waterbed represented a radical attempt to use physics to achieve the weightless sleep that the ancient Greeks could only dream of. Today, we have entered the age of the smart bed. Our mattresses now contain sensors that track our heart rates, our breathing, and our stages of REM sleep. We have come full circle to the Roman Lectus, as the bed has once again become a place where we eat, work on laptops, and consume entertainment. However, the ghost of our ancestors still lingers in our habits. We still fluff our pillows, a behavior linked to our primate ancestors nesting in the trees. We still prefer the weight of a blanket, a psychological remnant of the safety felt in those early communal grass beds. The bed remains our most essential tool, a time machine that carries us safely from one day to the next.